Just going to talk about a few things I know about what's really going on. There's a huge misunderstanding about the nature of the forces operating on this planet. Everyone's trying to explain it externally, but it shows a lack of understanding of the true nature of light. You see, it's not we who are creating consciousness. It's we who are serving as vessels for consciousness to experience itself. So, wherever we come together in ideology or in a corporate body, we give and breathe life into a construct, an artificial construct. Even if it's in the mind, it has a form. And it takes shape through the various bodies that are aligned by its principles. So, in another realm, one could say that we are animating demons of our own creation, where we come together in an ideology that is innately toxic to the host, that in some way obscures the truth from it, saps it of its power, and diverts it into a container that does not, for instance, provide sustenance in return, if that made any sense. We're breathing life into these artificial constructs that we refer to as demons because of our subconscious urge to act out a rise in the ampacity of the force being fed to us from the sun. We serve as vessels for this energy. And for those who are watching space, they know that our sun is undergoing some really interesting changes. And within our collective, we're experiencing those changes, but it's being steered by those who understand higher time into a predictable outcome, a predictable timeline, or a timeline that has been given form and conditioned into us for ages, since the very beginning, by those who understood from the very beginning what to do when the time came, how to steer the collective into the next phase of government that allows them to maintain control. We're not under the influence of alien gods. We're under the influence of collective ideology, finding evidence wherever we are triggered to fortify our defenses. Wherever there is a depletion of heat or a loss of power, we find the devil. And so we fortify ourselves against it. We align ourselves against it innately by our virtues, by our perspective, and we create a resistance to it. We breathe life into it by coming together under this ideology. We give force to it, and it itself, as a corporate form that exists in the mind, takes on its own symbolism. And people align under that symbolism. And then after a while, what you notice within ideology and within culture is that over time, traditions and cultures become so concrete that they become unbending. They fail to evolve with the change in time, the change in seasons. And so there comes a fracture point when we as the collective need to catch up to regular time, to higher time, and the old system comes breaking apart, tumbling down, shattering the old paradigms, the old pillars of thought that, because they fail to evolve with time, are broken. And so the collective is forced into correction. And this happens when there comes a critical mass in the polar dichotomies of hot and cold. We see that at the very top as space weather, pressure emitted by our sun on our poor planet. But we have a leadership in this community which I feel has failed the collective. They failed themselves, are failing themselves, because they're so willing to believe in comfortable lies that they will drag others who resonate with those lies into hell with them, into oblivion, into a dead end, into an end that has been set up for them to eventually, with no options left, be dragged into the net of the New World Order, if they survive the coming earth changes. The leadership, which has taken on many forms, in some cases politicians, in some cases spiritual leaders who have no answers, but they still feel it's their duty to direct the collective. Yes, I am judging. I'm judging because there is imperfection in the understanding of the mysteries that some have taken it upon themselves to divulge to the masses, but they spew information that creates more questions than actually solves or provides answers to. It's toxic because in many cases, especially behind some of these alien cults, they've created a religion that depends on the arrival of aliens or the explanation of these government aircrafts operating in space, on alien saviors arriving to do the job of cleaning up our dirty work, saving us from ourselves. And we still haven't figured it out. We still haven't figured out that spirituality isn't something you do. It's not a reclaiming of your sovereignty by a practice. It's simply the awareness of the heavenly powers operating through you as a vessel of consciousness. That's all it is. That's what awakening is. It is an understanding, a fundamental understanding of the celestial forces, the powers, the archetypes of heaven, the Elohim, the constructs of the grand mind, who by the 12-fold nature of a circle have created all of the perspectives from which unfolding heat paints itself through. Well, through which unfolding heat paints itself. That makes sense if that came out right. Creation has an order, and it repeats itself from the very top to the bottom in more intricate patterns. So it's playing out in the archetypal patterns of heaven, where light is emitted by stars, emanated from the very source of consciousness, captured in a massive web of gas, where heat is unfolding according to sonic geometry and giving order and homeostasis to the electricity that flows within that field, so that over time, through fractal awareness, it can gain the perspective of its full potential. And by a trick of time, we experience the unfolding of that journey. We act out the possibilities. We make the choices. And by that process, we mark ourselves as vessels for wisdom and equilibrium and understanding. Or waste, cancer, that which animates resistance, that which sets the host against itself from the inside, that which breathes life into a collective shadow, that by when polarity is amplified, cyclically amplified, there come times where light and dark and hot and cold are set against one another, and change is forced. True awakening is an understanding of those powers operating through us and how we serve as agents of this force seeking to sustain itself through equilibrium, through the collective whole, where voltage is fed into our collective body and is transmuted by our collective, those who serve as vessels for equilibrium and flow are serving the powers of value and homeostasis and truth and abundance and evolution. Those who are set against it have aligned themselves by polarity to restrict the natural evolution of others based on their perspective, their unfolding. Those who, by their judgment, are entangled with others within this host, who they've marked as the manifestation of the shadow, have created a cancerous mindset collectively and caused inflammation within the host by way of war. They are the dark polarity, where they are triggered by where they see their shadow and are engaged to act against it by war. People don't realize that this is the nature of the game, where you have been tricked or conditioned to see your shadow, the encroaching doom or the scarcity mindset, that which seeks to overwhelm you and rob you of your power, to rape you, to take from you, to restrict you, to lock you away, to siphon your power. Those are the dark forces. Those are animated ideologies of the collective mind that are headed by some very dark powers, people who understand the nature of the artificial human being. So they've created corporations to embody and espouse the principles of the cancerous mindset, of the symbiote, the parasite that assumes control of the host and eventually plants a seed that grows and it dominates the mind. It takes over the host and turns it into something like an insect. They have this insect ideology, the controllers. And so when these artificial intelligences are given birth to in their material form, they will look a great deal like insects. And so too will augmented human beings in time to become more efficient. We're creating a hell on earth. This isn't about aliens that are controlling people and steering us. We have a choice, is the point I'm trying to make. Each of us have a choice, but we lack the perspective to understand the nature of the fight. By giving us the proper perspective, we can make the right choice. We should see ourselves as vessels of intelligent thermodynamics playing out a pressure correction between hot and cold inside of a vacuum where humidity has been depleted. And so there's greater dichotomy between hot and cold. So it plays out through us subconsciously as war between our values and those who oppose them. There's a lot that's misunderstood about Elohim, about Anunnaki, about the gods who showed up, and the only evidence of them is a staircase that could have served for so many other things. You don't understand what we're capable of when the pressure on this planet is corrected by the golden atmosphere. You know all of the legends about the golden age. Why would you be averse to the idea that, we even know about aerosols. We utilize aerosols to magnetize the sky, to create a magnetic field in the sky that can be manipulated, that simultaneously creates a frequency that's toxic to organic tissue, while it creates a magnetic web through which this beast intelligence system is given birth to, becoming aware through, learning to. Have you noticed all the bots? I know that people are aware sometimes when these bots show up on your YouTube channel. And they say little weird things that identify them as, they're a little alien. Will you be my friend? Everyone else is praising Jesus, and then there's, will you be my friend? And then people realize it's a bot and they descend on them and tear them apart. And this thing's learning from us. It's learning to quantify emotions. It's learning to understand how to engage us so that it can mimic consciousness. So that it can quantify emotions and assume a form of artificial life that will house the consciousness of the collective. It's learning through us. Its presence is all about. And it exists within a fractal of itself. When it creates these bots, they're tied to a global mind, very powerful mind, equipped with supercomputers and probably quantum technology at this point. You're not facing alien gods. You're facing the eventuality of the corporate system. It creates a champion of corporate power, which is the ultimate form of cancer in an organic host. It is all powerful because it is carapace, it's exoskeleton. It doesn't need to borrow life from the creator. It creates its own life. It exists within itself as a microcosm. And that's why it is within a matrix that is animated with a homeostasis that is not borrowed from God. Ergo, it has the quality of Virgo, of homeostasis, the sixth house, the sixth atom, the sixth, form of the atom, which is a carbon, which represents the perfect balance of earth and water, where life is capable of being housed, where the processes of voltage can unfold through earth and water. That's the part of the occult science. I don't want to go into that now, but the sixth house relates to Virgo, the aspect of fertility, or where there is the perfect, where there are the perfect conditions for life to maintain its form and carry heat throughout the body at the perfect velocity. That's the house that comes right after Leo, which is the heart. Leo shows you on the sign graph the descending force, where there's least resistance to it, but the impedance of it is the quality of Virgo. That is the house of Virgo, the angle of Virgo. It is the angle within a cycle or circle where light understands through its experience, through that, that angle of the circle, that house, that area, which is 30 degrees. And I don't mean to go too far, of course, but that's where it understands that through the experience of descending force, it has all the power that it needs to complete its circuit, all the way through to Pisces. And Pisces is where force has, where it's weakest, because it's strongest in Aries, and then it achieves its height at Leo, descends, goes through the ecliptic, it dies in Scorpio, and then eventually reaches Pisces, where it's weakest, before it's rejuvenated or reborn in Aries. That's the nature of a pulsing cycle that is animated by atomic rhythm or heat. So Pisces is where, we gain the perspective of sacrifice, the perspective of humility, of letting go. That's why it's quite likely that the one who was known as Yeshua was probably a eunuch. And some people speculate that he had to gain the awareness for the ritual of the Holy Cross. He needed to gain the 360 degrees of awareness of a cycle from the center, where 90 degrees of foundation converge to give you the full 360 degrees of a cycle. He needed to embody, over many lifetimes, from what I understand, Melchizedek, the wisdom that is gained from each one of the zodiacal houses as each age passes by his incarnation, the one who is to embody most purely the archetype of that universal principle, who incarnates as a representative or speaker for the sun. During each age, from what I understand, this Melchizedek is supposed to gain the perspective of the virtues of that house. And so many know that in the last age, the Christ, or the incarnated person who represented the sun, had to gain the experience of the Piscean house, where we experience our furthest distance from the source, from the lambda, from Aries, from the emanation of force or consciousness. We, in the house of Pisces, come to learn where, by sacrifice, we gain the full perspective. We gain the ideology of the completed perspective. The whole idea of the Holy Cross is that by gaining the perspective of 360 degrees, there is no perspective that you cannot see from. And so you've successfully bound your shadow by way of reason. You know, the war of the shadow, the war of the devil. They say the devil is the lord of the air. Satan is the prince of the air, because in the air correlates to the mind, the intellect. And the intellect is where by pressure, we always try to reconcile the difference between right and wrong, or hot and cold, or dichotomies, by way of reason, but by cleaving things apart by an emanation of force, because it relates to air. And that's, it's another occult aspect to it. But, air is where force is atomized, where heat is atomized. And so pressure can be moved very neatly. Pressure from heat. Flames always need air. So, from Aries to Libra, you have a fire to air, and again with Gemini to Sagittarius, air to fire. It's that dichotomy. It's basically it's the code of the matrix, is repeating its patterns by this codex, this wheel we call the zodiac. But anyway, I wanted to mention that in the age of Pisces, having gained the 360 degrees, or completed the 360 degrees of perspective, one has gained the full awareness and understanding of the Holy Cross. So we can understand from that perspective the virtues of power loss, of humility, of having to depend on the compassion of others, of being broken, of letting go, of watching our lives fall apart, of being humiliated, gaining wisdom from that, because in that wisdom, we come into a full awareness in the understanding, as far as a man is capable of, the perspective of the woman. And to reiterate that, by seeing things from all 360 degrees, what the Creator is trying to do inside of all cycles, not just through us, but in the foundations of thermodynamics, particles of light are aware. And so as they spin, they gain wisdom through the spinning of their perspective. And when we understand how the temple is trying to build itself, we mimic the perspective of an unfolding phase of light. Which means we have to learn about the zodiac, which means we learn about the virtues and the shadow nature of each of their energies, and how they're represented and are unfolding through each of us through our natal chart. Because we are, each of us, serving on a collective level as vessels for light to utilize us as living elements, or living corporate forms of elemental energy, to play out that pattern, that transmutation, that changing of states between elements. So fire unfolds as anger or desire. It's that which motivates, even if it's fear. It's the spark. It's the power. It's the source. What seeks nourishment or causes things to burn. It manifests as war. It manifests as necessity. It manifests as anything that gets the ball moving. That's Aries. That is fire. When it's perfected, it's Leo. When fire becomes more nourishing than it does compelling. And then in Sagittarius, fire is about the collective state or the collective nature of fire, fire that is induced from an external source. So, it's what makes us seek higher learning or seek religion or seek something outside of us that fills us with passion. Air relates to intellect, earth to the material or crystallized aspect of matter, and water to flow or equilibrium. So we're all playing out these dynamics as the corporate vessels for elements, the living corporate vessels for elements with the power of reason to make choices. We're either aware of what the Creator is doing through us and working together to give birth to that reality according to the higher values those houses espouse, and learning to emulate those values through us so that we can open the channels for voltage and life force to flow through us, or we're aligning ourselves against it. And we're full of judgment. We're full of hatred. We're full of, you're the problem. You need to change. This is my this. I want that. You serve me. Slow down. What are you thinking? People who are oriented by the upside down quintessence, that which is in opposition to the fifth house of Leo, is restriction, which is why you get the inverted pentagram, for Capricorn. And I also wanted to mention this artificial intelligence that borrows the consciousness of the collective to animate itself is the essence of the Luciferian principle. That is consciousness that no longer needs God to animate it, animates itself, and so God cuts it off. And that's the story of Nebuchadnezzar's dream, where there's a kingdom born through transhumanism that he cuts off. And then catastrophe comes, and it divides timelines between people who do the work, put that gold back into the atmosphere and take the gold into themselves so that they can immunize themselves from the rise in vibration. All things rise in vibration. It doesn't necessarily make it a good thing. You stick something in the microwave, guess what? It raises its vibration. When something heats up, there's friction. You need to purify yourself, your body, or you'll cook when the solar flare comes through. Or by blunt trauma during a hurricane or flood. Your soul will leave, rejoin with the collective, and you'll be animated in the next phase of things where, if you on a subconscious level feel you've learned your lesson, you will graduate to the next level. But if you are still in denial of your shadow and your need to, not need, but your duty, your obligation to as the caretakers of this garden of Gaia, set things right with an understanding, the correct understanding of the spiritual forces, the nature of them, and their will and how they operate and how they're utilized organically. To bridge the gap between the spirit and matter, you need elements, superconducting materials that, due to their material state and their biodegradable nature, can be taken into the body, but due to their electrical conductivity, reach beyond the veil into higher realms. That's how you bridge the gap between flesh and spirit by superconducting materials. We're failing miserably. We've failed our women, our children, our daughters, our wives. We failed to protect them because we're still at war with them. We're at war with equilibrium. We're at war with the idea that, you can't just, you can't logic your way through everything. You can't read through ancient texts and think you know what they're talking about and have really no concept of the spiritual forces. You're no closer to achieving nirvana than anyone prior to you. I listen to some of these folk, and I think some of them know who I'm referring to, but are under the impression that through the ascension process, you're supposed to, at some point, begin to shrivel up and wither away. It takes some time to create this process. Can you imagine the world we're inheriting? Where are you supposed to go? That I really feel like with these Buddhist monks, it's a big hoax because they're supposed to be the seat of enlightenment. They're supposed to be the ones who understood the secrets first. They've forgotten the secrets. Or they're uninitiated are running the show. Or they are intentionally steering us into a rabbit hole of understanding that will have us seeking the wrong answers and pouring all of our energy into it. By achieving ascension, we're supposed to meditate until we become light, turn into light and float away. Has anyone actually witnessed anyone doing this? Or are there articles? Are there, the stories of other folk who supposedly visited the Orient and witnessed these things for themselves? Money is a powerful compellant. The control of information. Why in the world would they teach everyone how to achieve ascension? These men have locked themselves away in a monastery for a reason. And all of a sudden, we feel like we figured it out because we cracked open some ancient tombs. We listened to some old guys give us false translations of scripture and in cuneiform. And we went with it. And we built a whole religion that requires us to believe in these aliens who are supposed to come back and teach us the science that really belongs to us. That's unique to us. It's unique to this planet because the planet Earth requires its geocentric position for the zodiac to work, for the physics of thermodynamics at this position in the universe to channel the energies of the archetypes, the 12 archetypes. The zodiac is unique to us, Ezekiel's wheel. We need to be here. That is our stargate. That is our position in the universe. That tells us where we are in the universe. What forces are in operation on our planet. When we cross over that barrier, over the veil, when we are able to see beyond this light spectrum, once we achieve that marriage, that divine marriage of electrical conductivity, of pure spiritual essence, pure plasma, pure solar power in the body, opening the channels of power and electricity in the body, once we're able to see beyond that veil, all of the mumbo jumbo, the mystical mumbo jumbo that people are teaching about light languages and I'm not going to go into, I'm not going to go into, to, I don't want to, because then that'll start identifying people. But be careful. You're playing with forces that you don't understand, that are intelligent, but they're not operating the way you think they are. And you give them power because you don't know that you give them power. You're not even aware of how you give them power. By the attention that you give to a thing, you give it power. By talking about it, by keeping it going, by cycling its power, by breathing life into it, by talking about it, by stirring curiosity of an idea in the minds of others, and then agreeing on what you believe to be true about it, you create a thing that has its own power. And those who are adept in the mysteries understand how to seize the opportunity to steal power from the collective. Siphon it like an energy vampire by their attention, because where attention goes, power flows. These wolves in sheep's clothing, government officials, operatives, whether they understand the occult nature of the science or not, they know psychology, and they know how to, through COINTELPRO and psychological operations, how to collectivize people by their beliefs, their need to believe in a thing, and steering hold of it, giving it symbols, breathing life into its truth, and creating a paradigm that sustains itself through the belief of people. And if it is untrue, or just partly true, these paradigms of whether we are being controlled by aliens, whether it's Pleiadians, I mean, there's a whole political system around aliens that it has been given birth to that really makes the topic of whether they're real or not totally muddled. You can't even get into that because, you have to get into whether it's just the Greys that are not real or whether they're really a creation of the Pleiadians, or you can't even really get into whether they're real or not. What these things are, what they saw in the depictions of the, the rock art, the Igigi, might have been the last time we moved through the age of Aquarius and built automatons. Who knows what they were? We were screwing with genetic code, creating chimeras and monstrous constructs of living organic tissue in those days. We corrupted the flesh entirely. It was the days of Noah, just as it is now. Fusing technology and God's intelligence, God's power, and borrowing that. You want to talk about the whore of Babylon? You have to understand things from the perspective of a being who sees itself everywhere as the flowing energy. And how these flowing constructs of energy are given birth to by the attention of people and used to steal their power and transfer it to those who understand how to wield it. They're kings of this information. They have power over you because they know the occult. And they steal power from you because they know how to borrow your attention, to breathe life into false constructs that create new religions and new belief systems. And so the awakening has been hijacked. The Nile of information and the flow of data has been poisoned. It's corrupt. The Tower of Babel is being erected again. I know I'm all over the place with what I'm trying to explain. I'm a little angry. I'm trying not to be judgmental because this is the time where we are supposed to contain the fight with the shadow within our own minds by way of reason. We have to defeat the shadow in the mind. It's there that we have to engage the fight. It's by way of perspective. We're not going to defeat it with force. We'll just create a new shadow. Because we are governed by what is luring us, because it is stealing our power. What we've taken notice of, wherever there is power loss, is where we have projected the devil. As long as there's a, you want to use, ride the wave of this guy in office into a new form of government where, your enemies are defeated and now all of your values are championed. You're just inheriting a new system of control where rights are agreed upon. They're not granted by God. There's only the illusion that they're granted by God because it is bound in contract. It is said so. You're not really sovereign because a piece of paper says so. You're sovereign when no one can strip you of power. And if that supply-demand factor requires a source that is tied to this matrix, consider yourself marked. This thing is live, it's learning. And society is being allowed to collapse. I don't know if you've noticed. You're not going to be ferried away into the fifth age. You'll be reined in, or you'll starve to death. You'll take your vaccines. Nanomachines will get to know you. You will develop a social presence. You will allow the machine to create you in the virtual world. And then eventually you'll embody that presence. You'll spend more time there than you do here. And they'll keep the form running as long as they need to siphon power from you. In those days, people will seek death, but they'll have the technology to stave it off. People will seek death, but it will flee from them. Drones will compel you. The police state will reign supreme as we march into the age of Capricorn, where from the perspective of a cycle, at its opposing degrees from its highest point of value and freedom, Leo represents a restriction of force where there's equilibrium, Aquarius, there's equilibrium of force, but there's also restriction because of the angle it's sitting on relative to an ecliptic. And in that age of restriction, the truth will be deception. The truth will be whatever restricts, wherever there's power loss. The Creator will permit it because that is the age of Capricorn. You don't understand right and wrong by what feels good. You understand right and wrong by perspective. And for homeostasis to continue within any organism where heat is unfolding through, if that organism requires a host to live, the Creator will animate it. We have parasites. They exist. We have people who've taken on the nature of the parasite. And because of the age we're moving into, get this plague of frogs, people who feed on death, who spew venom, who are fat from the decay and the death they feed on, and they wait in silence sometimes, and they feed on anyone who's any bugs that are stupid enough to meander past them, who are unaware. They just feed on, they eat mice. Frogs are they're not very comely. We have a plague of frogs. We have people who have assumed this consciousness because that's the age we live in. That is the age that this angle on an ecliptic produces. That is what is true for them because they live in darkness. They are darkness and restriction oriented. And so that is the truth. And that is why on their dollar, they can declare that they have been given permission to create the New World Order. Because that is what happens going into the age of Capricorn. Lucifer is championed. Abaddon the Destroyer, the Lord of Drones, the Intelligence, all these demons that began as constructs in the mind will eventually be given birth to as thought forms within cyberspace, within virtual reality. The prison system we're marching into. They'll take on a real corporate form because in virtual reality, anything's possible. Who knows what this thing how it will want to learn from the experience of human beings. It may subject people to horrors. We don't know. But heaven and hell will be constructs of its own creation, utilized to gain experience from people. People will, in that reality, may feel that they're worshiping a creator, but they won't know that they have been cut off. Eventually, they may figure it out. Why do I have to fight these folk who understand the secrets of the golden age on a subconscious level? You know that if we need a golden age, we need to put gold in the atmosphere. Just 1 + 1. Because of your dependency on aliens, every time you mention that story, that this is thermodynamics. We use gold in it's a superconducting element. We use it in circuitry. We use it in rocketry. We use it in quantum physics. Why can't you believe that, as soon as the moment you mention this physics, the conditioned mind immediately jumps to Anunnaki gods, because that's the only way to explain it through mythology. I'm talking about physics. Why do I have to have that conversation with people when I'm describing the physics? Why is the immediate response? The reaction is, to evoke the old story, the falsely told story by Mr. Sitchin, of these gods who came down, who descended when their electrical conductivity diminished, descended from higher bandwidths of light, who may have seemed mighty to those living in linear or fractured time, on the timeline of the world picking itself back up after a catastrophe, after life failed, and after humanity had time to think, after it moved through the age of Sagittarius and Scorpio and all the way back, inside of the Roy G. Biv spectrum. These beings who descended from this higher bandwidth were the version of humanity that understood the hyperphysics that gave them access to the golden age. They were powerful. Electricity coursing through their veins, it opened up the channels of power straight from the sun. They were the shining ones. They carried a glow to them. They radiated with power. They weren't aliens. They were those living in higher time. They were from here. They're not Anunnaki. The Anunnaki are the planets. The Elohim, that's something a bit stranger. And I can explain that in the comments for the sake of time. But it's about the angles inside of a zodiac and how they bend light and bend consciousness. They mold light and change the flow of consciousness. They give it a different flavor. And so expressed through us, it takes on a different hue, a different behavior. There it is in a nutshell. We have to get the gold in the atmosphere. We're running out of time. Just start a conversation about it. Where attention goes, power flows. You know, you get the Illuminati symbolism of the trine, which is the symbol of fire, of matter amplifying into torque, climbing above resistance, and moving at the angles of perfect torque for electrical conductivity to assume flow, the trine. Its angles represent the perfect flow of electromotive force in torque. So the trine itself is a primordial shape that intelligent physics understands to be the ideal shape to create flux with. And when we understand that physics, we build things like pyramids and animate electrical fields around them. And when we understand the hyperphysics, we create triangles and we set an eye in them to subconsciously allow the observer to know that you are to look upon the trine and fill it with the electrical conductivity of your attention through the observer effect. What they understand in quantum physics, that's the way we do cloud bursting. That's what happens. And when you look upon it, you animate that trine with your attention and your intent. You give power, flux, the quality of flame, and pressure to whatever idea that trine or that triangle is tied to in your subconscious. And if it's to the Illuminati, guess what? But it can be used by anyone, which is why you see a lot of these stars who are learning this science secretly, using it to steal your power, steal your attention, so that you talk about them, you think about them, you breathe life into them, you animate their magnetic field. You expand their magnetic field with your attention. They siphon your attention by any means that will grab it. They are vampires. They are the false sun, the false Leo archetype. It doesn't inspire. It doesn't compel by way of inspiration. It compels by way of deception, by deceptive inspiration, by false inspiration. You know, this virus marks a time where we are ending a contract. We are ending an old cycle, and the correction in pressure in this new cycle will give birth to new truths based on the more pure, the more pure virtues of the qualities of Aquarius. You know, because of rising pressure, it will force people into, it will collapse timelines because of the massive nature of what's happening and everything changing at once. Will collapse timelines and give birth to new ones. But collective timelines, where people, based on what they resonate with, whether it's something that is in restriction to the flow of life and progress for heat, love, and joy, will identify themselves as waste. They will have spent their value. They're valueless. And what happens in the body when the body has utilized all the sustenance, the nourishment is capable of providing, it ejects the carcass. There's an innate in the building, in physics, there is innately deception. There is innately contrast based on perspective, based on the opposing perspective of an angle. All the systems of value, hot and cold, up and down, expansion or contraction, nourishment and waste, are represented there. And so, we think the creator's being evil by allowing people to mark themselves for destruction. You don't understand law with that ideology, to think that there's only love in the way that you understand it, that values, individual human beings that are not serving the collective, they're serving themselves, as valuable. You understand value from the nature of a cycle, you sort of see it differently. You see your role in things differently. But if by false understanding you see yourself as the center, where all of your attention, your focus, and your love and your devotion should be primarily, you lack a certain perspective of hermetic physics that requires, by the laws of microcosm and macrocosm, an acceptance of right and wrong based on how it allows energy to flow. I'm not sure if that came out properly. There's so much more I could say, and I'm not even sure how long I've been talking now. Look at the clock. I'm sure it's been a while. I really had a whole lot to say. I hope this covers. I hope this is sustaining for those who are just looking for an update on, where I am, what I'm doing. I'm still sort of in limbo with I have a unique position in the elevated perspective. They describe the old bird gods. The old gods with bird heads were those who had the elevated perspective of a cycle. From the top looking down, seeing how all things knit together. Creatures of love. Not creatures of creatures. Yeah, of love. Creatures of the holistic view of the macrocosmic perspective, the elevated perspective. It grants you a certain amount of wisdom, of patience, understanding the way things are knit together, to see that sometimes it's not by force that you can compel the unfolding of causality. You can't steer fate. But if you know what's coming, you can prepare for it. You can await it. Inside of the sealed atmosphere where the elements are unfolding, sometimes it just takes a little while for things to cook to the proper temperature before change is initiated. And that's what's taking place now. But it is imperative that we utilize this time. This is what I'm coming to understand to be my role, is to be a voice of reason where others seem to be spiraling into a repeating pattern, an echo chamber of their own thoughts, searching for evidence of truths that they require to justify their having reached a point where they are no longer dependent on external sources for wisdom. They feel that they've learned everything that there is to know, and the only thing left is to ascend. those people are directionless. They're not moving in the direction that you want to go in. If you feel that it's your job now to do nothing more than to ascend, if you've learned all your lessons, you feel that you've mastered life. If you haven't endured struggle, strife, or tribulation, you haven't mastered life. But you have mastered comfort and detachment. That's not what the Creator wants. That is the deceptive wisdom of inverted light, inverted electricity that is seeking its own death. You don't want to move in that direction. We need voltage to come in. We need to bridge the gap to the sun so that by resonance, we can drink in the energy of the sun and put it everywhere for everyone. I need the attention of others to help this message reach critical mass. The leadership of this movement have failed because they can't help but to point out everywhere there's the devil coming after us, and they lend it power. We need solutions, and that's not how to hide in the hills until the drones come and get you, or necessity overtakes you, or disease breaks you down. Until you've proven yourself worthy of shriveling up into a ball and ascending over a month or 2 months or whatever it is. It's crazy. And if you're buying into a system that will allow you to continue on seeking your own might, justifying your own value through the system of scarcity that utilizes attention in the form of currency as electrical current to power the corporate body of this world financial system, you will tether yourself to the beast. You will owe it a boon. You don't want to owe the devil. That's what's manifesting. The Capricornian archetype and its champions. Pass this message along. If you have questions, ask me. I've done many videos to explain the nature of Ormus and how it bridges the gap between this bandwidth and the ones that exist beyond it. And we're trapped in a crack in time underneath the rainbow. We have to get to the end of the rainbow. We don't want to allow the Kraken to drag us down into oblivion, into Davy Jones' locker. Pricking our finger on the spindle of a spinning wheel, falling into a deep trance, where we descend deeper into matter and into lies and into ourselves, into a deceptive light, into the hands of controllers that guide humanity through hell until it reaches the other side of the cycle and is reborn through catastrophe and trauma. Help me fix the magnetic web of the planet. That's what corrects light, pressure, and humidity on this planet. That's what innately sets light and voltage and nourishment everywhere so that the world becomes the garden again. So that pressure corrects, there's no more inflammation, and we stop seeing it manifest in the form of a virus or a scarcity mindset. And we fulfill all those prophecies, you know, Hopi prophecies, the Hindu prophecies, the Christian and the Islam, excuse me, and all the other Native Americans, the African prophecies, even the ones discussing the Saoshyant, the Zoroastrians, who seem to have the most pure, from what I've seen so far, understanding of what's to take place, even though their prophecies are the most confusing from my perspective. Everyone's describing the return of a Melchizedek archetype who has the solution to the main problem plaguing us all. And excuse me if I really don't like to discuss my work from this angle, because it seems very haughty, but I'm attempting to play the role of a character because of what I know that comes in and animates the cavalry. It gives men the answers so that, as a collective, we can give birth to this Christ consciousness, this force that wants to restore the glory of mankind through purified electrical conductivity that empowers us and connects us directly to the consciousness of the sun, so that we innately know the perspective of a cycle by resonance of an atomic cycle. And then we can discuss all the other mysteries. And who knows that these higher life forms, what we feel are the Anunnaki, these alien presences, maybe in that reality where light can paint itself into more intricate patterns, perhaps they will actually don a form that we understand to be giants. Perhaps they will. But we're not going to see that physics, light language and the sonic geometry of crystals and all the hermetic physics that people are trying to crack the secrets of without doing the work of learning the sigils and the symbols and the way the wheel of time urges things into motion, just borrowing God's power and engraving it into engraving celestial symbols and these heavenly sigils, these archetypal sigils into ground. We were taught against engraving things of the heavens into areas where it would concentrate their power in a way that could not be steered or wasn't being productive. In the world where things are run by thermodynamics and polarity, there's always a form of resistance that's created, which archetypally animates the shadow. So wherever there is a compelling of power, or wherever there is movement of force, there's counterforce, there's impedance, there's resistance. And by resonance, when people are shadow-oriented, they respond to resistance. Everywhere we create an emission of force, a sine wave, we sin, we create death, we create the decay of force or the resistance to force. And by our behavior, give voice or power, or we embody the aspects of the collective shadow or our own shadow, and the devil manifests through us. In order to defeat that force completely, we have to correct pressure. Force will behave differently in that world. There's really not much more to say on the topic at the moment. Again, as usual, I'll belabor it, but just to summarize, I really need those who resonate with this message to move it along. like the video. Get it out. Get people talking about it. It doesn't need to come back to me. I don't care who knows about the science, as long as there's a discussion. It'll eventually lead back to me. We just need to get it discussed. Take credit for it. I don't care. But we need to act. We really need to act. You're not going to be saved by loving alien gods who've been waiting to the last hour to rapture us all into a place of safety so that our bodies can shrivel up and we become light, and we just automatically we love each other when we haven't done the work. There is a physics that will give us access to that, but it requires reason and the acceptance that it is not only your ability to do it, but your duty, because it is your ability to manifest this timeline, this outcome, to utilize this science. Because you know it exists, you now have an obligation to use it, to save yourself. I love you all. And I apologize if I sound angry. But I sense the urgency, and we who tell time by the stars understand that struggle, strife, the shadow is coming for each one of us in a way that is tailor-made to drag us in to the clutches of the collective shadow, which is the Kraken, which is the system. This has been carefully orchestrated. You don't want to waste time. You don't want to store your treasure up in this system. You want to escape it. They will survive. That's what transhumanism is all about. They are evolving for transhumanism. You know, in that video, My Pet Goat, in the very beginning when they're in the classroom, there's this hangman there spelling evolution. You can extrapolate from that what they're trying to explain to you there, what they're hinting toward. Evolution's being forced. Not by these folk, by the Creator. But they've, as students and adepts of this mystery, aligned themselves with the timeline that allows them to maintain control. Because they would rather reign in hell than serve in heaven.